All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to Sama, Seattle Sacred Music and Art. I'm Derek Mazzoni, your host. I'm here with my friend, Rob Millis, and things are different, obviously. Let me take these headphones off. Things are different, obviously, because we are together in one room. For a long time, that was impossible. Sans mask. And so I wanted to let you know that you are our test flight with that, Rob, you, the audience, because this is the present that we wished for in the past, and hopefully a manifestation of that will be in the future. If you've been seeing our promos, Rob is a scholar, a musicologist, a guitarist. He's many things, but the thing that we're going to be talking about today is that this person is a crate digger extraordinaire. It's not even crates. Some of them are in crates, but not too many.
I actually sort of dislike that term, crate digger.
Okay. You don't start like that right now. Okay, we'll go into that for a second, but let me do this right now. We're going to be talking about a lot of things tonight, but we're going to be specifically talking about this one record. Sound Storing Machines came out on Sublime Frequencies. The record is available now,
even on CD.
Do you want to just go through with this whole thing? Okay. The first 78 RPM records from Japan, 1903 to 1912. Rob is going to be playing you some of these records. The thing that is truly intriguing about this is that this is 1903 we're talking about. So Japan opened up to the West maybe 30 years ago.
30 years prior to 1903.
1903, yeah. With Perry, and it was a culture in transition. And this is before 1905, the war with Russia and everything. And some of the music that is recorded on here was never meant to be heard outside of the temple that it was performed in. Like, this was the first time that something that was going to be created for that one time, that moment, temporal, spatial aside, it was for that. And suddenly you're recording it, you're capturing it, you're transmutating it into something else altogether. So you and I can talk about this, you and I, and like, wow, that's really cool. He goes into minutia about this stuff. So first off, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. What drew you to this? You got a scholarship, you got a Fulbright scholarship to go and record this, but...
I got a Fulbright scholarship to go to India, actually, 10 years ago. That was the Fulbright. This was a different granting organization, but I did have a grant.
What was the granting organization?
It's called the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission.
Ah, how'd you find it?
Kind of connected to the NEA and the U.S. government, and sort of one of these grants, kind of like the Fulbright, that came into being after World War II in an attempt to bring countries together by exchanging scholars and artists.
Mhm. This is not exchanging scholars and artists. This is like going into a whole other space and time.
Well, for me, it is, though, because I use a lot of the materials that I collect on such on these residencies to make much more contemporary music as well, make sound art, and I guess we can put some links up for some of my material that's even using some of the material I recorded in Japan. And it's also just a way to connect to a culture's sort of deeper roots and older collectors and older sort of purveyors of culture. It's to go in with a mission of, I'm not just going, this is why, not to jump right into this, but this is why I don't like the term crate digger, because I don't want to be competitive. I'm actually not there to take records out of the hands of people that maybe understand them better or deserve them. I'm there to, I don't want to be competitive about it. I just want to learn about the music by beginning at ground zero, essentially, of recorded music.
So let's hear a track first, and let's explain this track first, because it's intriguing to me, and I'd love for you to go through details.
Let's jump into, I'm going to throw on a track that's, there's a couple of them on this record. It's Gagaku music, which is one of the oldest continuously practiced orchestral musics in the world, roughly 700 AD. It probably came into being in Japan essentially via China and Korea, the styles of music. And this is something that's really interesting about Japan, is that a lot of traditions, a lot of musical traditions, currents from throughout Asia made their way for various reasons to Japan and then had nowhere else to go. And fortunately, Japan, something about the mindset there, they have a preservation, they have a traditional mindset, so a lot of things were kept alive. And Gagaku is one such type of music. It was essentially used only for court ceremonies, for the emperor, for a very certain Shinto, which is the sort of local Japanese religion, ceremonies. And essentially it was unchanged, and essentially it was not meant as something that was a popular music to be listened to casually like we're about to listen to it. And so when this Westerner, whose name is Fred Gaisberg, came to Japan, he actually started in India on a Far East recording tour, the first such recording tour in the history of recorded music. So he made the first recordings in India in 1902. A month later, ended up in Japan and started recording there. And the reason that he was recording was that they were trying to sell gramophones, Victrolas, record players. And these things were brand new inventions. And some genius in the marketing department realized, hey, we have to have local music to actually sell these players to people. So he made many, many recordings there over several months in Japan in early 1903. I just have to say this. I love his very first diary entry was basically saying that the music of Japan was horrible and he hated it. And then a week later, he was like, well, it's all right. It's kind of growing on me, after he recorded for a while. And then about a week after that, he recorded the Imperial Gagaku Orchestra, the Imperial Household Orchestra. And as you were saying, this is fascinating because this orchestra was not meant to be heard by the general public. And here it is going straight to a commercial medium. So now suddenly people could hear things like this, which they never could before. And this is one of the glories of recorded music, I think. And one of the reasons that we're kind of living in an incredibly lucky time of so many recordings, so many things that we can access that really we weren't allowed to hear before.
But we started this particular episode of Sama with the most amazing looking gramophone that I've ever seen in my life. And tell me about that gramophone, because that's not like a little thing you just pick up. That's a commitment.
Well, just briefly before we play the record, yeah, that was that was a gramophone. They were manufactured in England in the 30s, and they were meant to be basically the best ever high. They were the hi-fi audio of that era. They were extremely expensive even back then. And this is something that I love about Japan is it doesn't exist, I don't think, anywhere else in the world. That was a store that more or less only sold gramophones and 78 RPM records. I was there in 2019. This store, there was another part of it that sold watches, and maybe there's some antiques or something, but basically that shop existed in the most expensive part of Tokyo to sell gramophones and 78 RPM records. Still. And I was just blown away when I discovered it. It's called Shellman's, and it's still there.
I bet.
They had these top-of-the-line gramophones. They love to play them for you, especially if you bought some records. And they sound amazing. They really do sound truly amazing.
It looks like it, but it's also, I noticed, right now you have a phone, you don't even have to say press play, you just say, play this, and it goes on. That's a commitment. That person is winding up the gramophone, opening it up, putting the record, the needle stylus has to go in a particular way, and that's it. And then you have to go in and turn it over again, wind it up, and there's another way of committing yourself to that experience that doesn't exist anywhere else. So this
is true. And this is one of the reasons that got me interested in 78 RPM records in the first place.
Okay, so we're going to hear the Gagagu track right now on Sama.
I'm going to say another thing about this record. Actually, not quite this record, but the other Gagaku type record that's on this my Sublime Frequencies record, is that it was when I first turned up in Japan, I was introduced to some collectors and I was invited to a listening session, which I love that they that collectors do this in Tokyo.
What does it entail?
It was in a small cafe. The collector had his gorgeous gramophone there, a tall, very loud, beautiful model of a gramophone from the 20s, maybe even a little earlier than the 20s. He had that in this cafe, and he brought records and he played them. He was mostly interested in jazz and sort of more popular songs, Western influenced jazz. But one of the things he played was a Gagaku record, from this very session. And I was like, this is so great. It's so magical
It's
to
magical.
hear this on an acoustic machine, no electricity, to hear it acoustic. It was magical. And then I talked to him many times during my months in Japan, traveled around Japan, learned a lot, met a lot of people. And at the end, I was in Tokyo at the end of my trip. There was another listening session that he set up, and he gave me that record.
Wow.
Which just blew me away, and now it's one of my most treasured possessions because it's got this connection to that whole experience. You gonna hold that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's nothing. It's this. It looks exactly the same as this. This is not exactly it. This is a different one, but anyway.
That's amazing because it's a whole other. It's an acoustic experience, so there's no electricity running through the cell. It's the wind up. It's a look into a different time. So mind you, Sama focuses on music that has an art that has an opportunity to create a transformative experience. Whether it's Sufi music, Qawwali music, or Gnawa, from different cultures, Yiddish music. There's something about that process, and there's something about the fact that this music can then be shared and presented. But the journey of that music is mesmerizing. It's sacred music. Just even the start of it, and where you're going, and how the mindset.
It's only meant for sacred ceremonies in temples.
And what that must have been like for Fred, was his name?
Fred Gaisberg.
To be there to record this thing, and for these artists and everybody to have this person there recording them all at the same time. It's just like one of those moments that there was before and now there's after.
Exactly. I think Fred's vision of it was summed up by the fact that he was like, I don't like this music. This is weird.
It is weird, but it grows on you.
Yeah. And I think that this was the stuff that started to grow on him. If you read his diaries, which you can find online, and he's kind of a fascinating individual. He was the first record producer, traveled the world in 1902, 1903, making these recordings. He discovered Enrico Caruso, the first great tenor of opera that became basically the first rock star
in the world.
So, but I often think, what was it like for the record buying public in Japan that had such reverence for the emperor and for their culture to suddenly have the opportunity to listen to this music that essentially had been kept from them?
Yeah.
That's fascinating to me.
That is interesting.
And Gaisberg was lucky when he went to Japan. There was an Australian expat who had lived in Japan for many, many years and spoke fluent Japanese. And there's an art in Japan called rakugo, which is storytelling, and it's a very popular art form of mostly sort of humorous stories. And this guy was one of the only foreigners to be practicing this, and he became Fred's guide to who to record while he was in Japan. And this helped open up a lot of doors that might not have been opened up otherwise. This person who was kind of connected to local music scene. And he introduced them to a lot of players, got a lot of actually folk musicians, a lot of serious players, as well as wandering itinerant minstrels to record. But what became popular in Japan, actually, though, was not the gagaku. What became popular was the rakugo, was the storytelling. Right away, the fact that these stories, these jokey stories, were recorded onto little discs, that became the first big sellers.
Do you have that?
I can play one or two
Let's
for
play
you.
one.
It's kind of a little hard because it's all in Japanese.
That's fine. Just so you know, this is the stuff that became popular. So that is also an interesting story too, because
I'm going to walk out a picture for just a
walk out
second.
picture. This is an interesting story because there's this. Once you introduce this music and this form, what people expect to happen doesn't happen. Like, yes, people want to hear this amazing temple music, but they also want to hear funny little tracks that are going to make their lives a little easier at that moment. Is that what happened?
Probably that is exactly what happened. Music is all about escape.
Yeah.
For a lot of people. So this is it's a really interesting little record. This is 7 inches. And the story behind this is actually
and it's one side.
It's one-sided. Many thousands of hundreds of years ago in Seattle, my friend Jeffrey Taylor and I, Jeffrey runs Wall of Sound record store. Derek knows him. And Jeffrey and I play together as a band called Climax Golden Twins. We were browsing around in a record store, or a junk store, and we found this book, 2 books, just like this, that look like 45s. And we looked at them and we're like, these aren't 45s. These look like 78s. Wow, we've never seen anything quite like this. These are all Japanese, 7-inch Japanese 78s. And I didn't think that much of it. We were just starting to collect such recordings at the time. And many years later, when I started getting more serious about 78s and researching the early history of recording, I started to realize that many of these were actually the ones recorded by Fred Gaisberg in Tokyo at that time. And you can tell that if you're a record nerd like me, because the run out groove, this part here, has a matrix number written in it with a code that actually meant that Fred Gaisberg recorded it. In his handwriting, he probably inscribed it into the wax. So this is also another fun record because it's called Ancient Court Singing. And so I was super excited. I thought, oh, that's going to be a gagaku record. That's great. Turns out it's not. And it took actually me going to Japan and playing this record for collectors saying, well, this is great. What ancient court music is this? And they were like, actually, no. This is just a dumb story that was committed to record.
Oh, no. You had
the wrong title on it. And I kind of like it even more.
Oh, I like it even more now. That's funny. You're like, oh, this is the thing.
Yeah. So.
Thank
I
you.
love the fact that it's labeled ancient court singing.
And you believed it forever.
I believed it for many, many years that this was the rarest of the rare. I mean, it is a very rare record, but it's not as unusual. And I even thought, I was like, wow, they had really great, weird ancient court singing. I mean, it sounds like it would have been a lot of fun to be in a court in Japan 1,000 years ago.
If you're just checking it right now, I'm here with Rob Millis, who is a sound artist, guitarist, and a producer. He has a new record on Sublime Frequencies called Sound Story Machines, the first 78 records from Japan, 1903 to 1912. He's also an author. He's got a couple of books out. Did you grab the books?
Sure. I've got some books right here.
Good man. There they are. Oof, they're heavy because there's a lot of stuff in there. We are looking at, and
That's
it's
Victrola favorites
with CDs in there. I love this particular book. And then we have
That's Indian Talking Machine, which is I did my Fulbright in India, and it's a lot of it is the very earliest recordings from India.
Paris to Calcutta, Men and Music on the Desert Road. And this is, if you go to, also, Rob is our only sophomore Sama artist. And if you go and check out, I think, the 4th Sama session that we did during the pandemic, which we're still in right now, we talk about that particular book and hear music from that. I want to talk to you a little bit about the people that you've met, because I know for a fact that you're in Seattle, our home, and to go to Japan, which is a significant population, and to find these, I'm not going to call them the crate diggers, I'm going to call them aficionados. How did you find each other? And what was that like for you? Because it's one thing if you find, like, you worked at a great record store, Wall of Sound, awesome record store, but to go to Japan and find people that work in a record store, that's one thing. But to find people that go deep into that, that's a whole other skill set. What'd you do?
It was difficult, and I can't give away any trade secrets. No, you just, one connection leads to another. And a great thing about collecting old records, I think if you find someone that's interested, interested in sharing. Not everyone is interested in sharing. A lot of people want to keep their records. They're possessive.
You're not asking to take them away,
but still, people are a little possessive. What are you going to do with this information and blah blah blah? But for the most part, you meet one person, they're going to introduce you to other people. There's the little listening sessions. They're going to introduce you to more people. I won't lie, Japan was difficult because of the language barrier. My Japanese was terrible, but I met some great people who helped translate. There was a wonderful collector, one of the premier collectors in Japan, named Norio Okada, who he actually wrote the notes for the Japanese edition of this record, which is obviously released in Japan. But for the whole time I was there, everyone was like, oh, you must meet this man. You must talk to him because he's the one that knows. But I could never connect with him. I could never connect with someone who knew him well enough to introduce me, or they didn't want to introduce me. I mean, even to the point where I'd be in a record store and they'd say, oh, Norio was just here yesterday giving a presentation about 78s. And I'd be like, oh, I know it. So it was like this thing. And another place I went that I bought several records from an old antique dealer. One time I was in there and he's like, I've got nothing new. Oh, well, wait, there's a collector that sometimes comes in, but he hasn't been in a while. So you can look at the records I've set aside for him. And I bought a few from that, which was great. And that turned out to be this guy too. So it was always like I was dancing around him. And then I finally, right at the end, I was introduced to him and we had a great time at his house through a translator. listening to records and talking about all the different strange old labels from Japan from the early days. So
who was that person listening to the Heartbreak Hotel version in the introduction video?
that was a very different part of Japan. That was Okinawa.
Mm-hmm.
That was a magical little bar in Okinawa. Japan is full of great bars like this too, but that bar was every square inch from floor to ceiling was covered in mostly film, Hollywood, but also Japanese film memorabilia and music memorabilia. And he was that bar was right next door to an antique store that I discovered. And as I discovered it, my friend, I was in Okinawa to do a presentation about old recordings. My friend that had set this up for me, I texted him and said, are there any antique stores I can?
So thank you, Marco, for turning me on to that. And here we have a pretty significant Okinawan population as well as a Japanese population. And I'm looking forward to actually welcoming you, if you're here or if you're visiting, to some of these concerts, as it looks like we'll actually be doing them live. Crossing fingers that we can make that happen.
Yeah, Okinawa was, it's wonderfully Japanese and wonderfully very different from Japan. And super welcoming, wonderful
and
place.
warm.
Yeah. And met a lot of great people there too. So I suppose I should point out that this is not music like this is not on the compilation. There's going to be another one,
not yet,
hopefully, of Okinawan music,
which would be pretty amazing to see and to experience. So some of you may be asking, because I've done Sama sessions now for a year and a half. Unbelievable.
Has it been that long?
It's been that long. So not a year and a half, year and a few weeks, few months. Often it's a performance of an artist or a band from different parts of the world. And I've asked Rob to come back here specifically. A, he's close, and B, most importantly, this is a window into a different time. And there's something about music, and there's something about the transformation of culture from one to another, and the accelerants or the activators that make that happen. And it's not a value judgment saying one or the other, because it's way too complex for that. But it's intriguing to actually have a oral representation of that culture before that changes, before the record industry comes in, before these artists are suddenly put into a position where it's like that song has to stop now because we've run out of room for this record, or you need to think about what you're going to be doing here because this music is suddenly popular, and then you could be making money, or somebody's could be making money, or this suddenly travels. And so this culture, Japan especially, where it was the hermit kingdom, it's like nobody sees you, suddenly is everywhere, and it's influencing culture someplace else. So getting that moment is really interesting. And it affects me because suddenly it's like traveling through space and time. You're there in that moment when this record is when this record is being played. And the thing that's intriguing about this particular record is that, and I didn't know you did this, but there is a lot of noise, like space before the songs begin, especially the early ones. And I love that because everything is so manicured and so clean. And you left this part where suddenly, the musicians are about to get started. They're about to play. Like, I love the parts in music where you can hear the musician breathe, or when you hear the fingers working up the frets, where it's just the act of making that music is as important to me as of the music itself.
It makes it very immediate.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's
and
the
like
word I'm
they're
looking
right
for.
there. And that's the thing about 78 also, is that most of these recordings were made in hotel rooms. There was no, and the amount of audio gear Derek brought over just to make this happen in my living room is, it's incredible. But in those, there was nothing. Once they made the master recording, that was it. There was no mastering after that. There was no refining it. There was no anything else. And that's something that's kind of magical about these recordings.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, to what you were saying, it's not always intentional that the crackle surface noise is left there, but sometimes you just can't get rid of it. These are very old recordings, and the medium was very new, really only a few years old at the point where he started making recordings. And a lot of people, now we know, don't say anything, the studio's on. Back then, people didn't really even understand that. And one of my favorite things, too, was just listening to a 78 the other day where into the runoff groove, you can hear someone saying something, and then it goes into the runoff groove, and it just loops around forever. And I love finding those on these old records. People just didn't quite know what to make of the medium. It was very new.
We're going to play one more song. You choose. The fact that these things survive, we're talking about 1903, the history of Japan, and that region is filled with wars, obviously, turmoil. The fact that these things continued, what's the story with that? How did these things...
People loved them, and it was something that you would keep with you. In the case of some records, they would travel abroad, which is also pretty fascinating, that you're bringing a little piece of this culture with you. But otherwise, it's just luck of the draw, I guess. I mean, it's horrifying to think of what was lost. There was, especially during World War II in the Western countries, England and America specifically, shellac was needed for the war effort. And so many people brought in records to be destroyed so that the shellac, which is what these old records were made out of, not vinyl, could be reused. Often it was actually just reused by the big record labels to press, the Andrews Sisters and stuff like that. But to me, that is like kind of one of the most depressing thoughts ever, is that these records were being destroyed so that for the war effort, because of a war. And this is not accidentally bombed or accidentally destroyed in the course of war, but consciously destroyed so that the material could be reclaimed. You know, and Harry Smith, who did the Anthology of American Folk Music, he very famously worked in a plant that was reclaiming old 78s, and he started to get pretty freaked out by this and started to keep a lot of the great records that became his collection.
Yeah, Harry, I know. And didn't Sublime release a collection of his? Or Dusted Digital did?
Dusted Digital did.
Okay. And you work with them
labels.
also, too?
I've the Victrola Favorites book that we just held up was on Dusted Digital.
Okay.
And they really focus on early recordings in 78s. Sublime Frequencies, who I do a lot of work with, mostly focuses on music from non-Western countries. I'm the one that brings the 78s fetish to that label and have done several projects that are focused on early recording. But Sublime Frequencies is, you know, we do stuff from all over the world.
Great label. I play them a lot on my show on KXP. And whenever I can, opening DJ sets, hopefully we'll get to do that again. Let's turn.
Do you want me to play this old wind-up player, or do you want to do another thing first?
Let's play the old wind-up player.
All right, so you might have to talk for a second.
Okay. So right now, this box is going to be a really interesting story. So when we think about mobile music and how people actually talk, you're thinking about the. You want me to hold the mic?
Sure.
You're thinking about, you know, what were some of the first things that you had? You're thinking of the boombox. You're thinking of the Walkman. You're thinking of the iPod. Things that allow you to take music on the road. Gramophones, you know, were not, unless you're actually looking at this little number here.
It's incredibly heavy.
Put it here.
No, I got it. It's because it's cast iron. The Japanese make things very, very well. This was based on actually a Swiss design, but this is probably from the 30s, early 30s. It's called a Mickey phone, and it's a little portable wind-up gramophone that is encased entirely in a little box. So now I'm going to pull it all apart and wind it up and play it for you.
Okay. Let's make sure we got you. Okay.
This is the thing. So there's the horn. There's the stylus. There's the platter. There's the crank, which goes in there.
How many times have you taken this apart and put it together?
Millions.
That looks awesome. So as we saw in the opening video, this is all acoustic. This is so you have to wind up the spring to make it work. It's a spring, right?
Mm-hmm. It's based on old clock motors, more or less. Yeah, Derek, you got to keep talking here.
Oh, I'm mesmerized. I'm mesmerized by this process. So you have to wind it up first. And so what Rob told me is that this is basically how Japanese soldiers or whoever went out there could entertain themselves, because the 78s come in these books, and then so you basically set it up, and you've got the horn, and you've got your mobile music device. What now, you know, as we obviously listen to Spotify or radio or however we choose to listen to our music, this is the beginning of that. And that also is pretty transformational to me, because this music, which originated in temples or when a troubadour would come through your village and play, they would leave and you would have the memory of that. Or if you're a musician also, you're actually able to learn the songs. But here now, you can record the songs and take them with you. So
I'm going to play an old, more or less geisha song from Japan on this little player. And I'm not sure if I've wound it up enough. This is also great. This is a beautiful Japanese needle tin. You had to change the needle almost every time you played a record.
Every time?
Pretty much. That's what the recommended guidelines were.
So you'd have to have a crap load of needles.
Yeah. But don't forget, everything was different back then. You didn't necessarily listen to 10,000 records. And of course, I'm sure no one actually used them only once.
Yeah, that's a commitment.
Yeah.
It's like people. I just found out that you're not supposed to dry your socks. You're supposed to hang dry them. And I was like, right, I'm gonna take all my socks and hang dry them.
You're supposed to wash your socks?
Yes.
All right, I hope I've cranked this up enough. Here we go.
Okay, let's give it a shot. That's amazing.
There you go.
Rob, that's amazing. And it sounds good.
Yeah, they're really fast. It's a really fascinating little device. The the vibrations made by the grooves travel up through the needle. They get amplified through this little cone here, horn, that projects them onto the record, which is a nice reflective surface, and then that reflects them up even louder out. So
how'd you find this thing?
My wife found it in an antique store, actually in Japan, on a trip to Japan many years before I went there. She's like, I think my husband would like this. She was right.
She was right.
She complained bitterly about having to carry it around because it weighs a ton.
Bitterly.
But I have loved it ever since, and it was so magical to bring this back to Japan and play records on it for people. They loved it, and I loved doing it too. It was great because it's a solid piece of technology that is, it'll outlast my stereo.
And you, and all of us.
Likely.
So we will put links about Rob and Sublime Frequencies and about this new record and his books and everything else out there. This has been a fascinating conversation, my friend.
Do we have time for another record?
Let's do it. Done? Let's do another record. But before we go there right now, as you're going up, I know that there's going to be people that are going to be watching this going like, how do I start this thing? How do I get into this? You look content, shall we say. You don't look, some people that are rich beyond belief or are going through life in various forms of like, I need more. You look content. You look like you found the thing that you like to do, and seeing the pictures of you and other content people in Japan and in other places and in India and also, it feels like this is something that gives you back, like this art form, this
absolutely. I mean, why else would you do it if you?
What is it that you get from this, and how do you start? What's the first
start? I don't know. I mean, I started. I've always loved music ever since I was in high school, college. Before that, somehow. My ear was always looking for something new. I don't just listen to 78s. I listen to pretty, experimental new music, sound art.
I've seen you. Yeah, you go broad, but you go broad and deep at the same time.
Sounds, and I'm always looking for new sounds. And 78s was a wonderful way, many years ago, to suddenly come across a new world of sound. It's in a lot of ways, to a lot of people's ears, it is a narrower sound width compared to a hi-fi stereo today.
Mm-hmm.
but there's actually so many other things going on. The immediacy we talked about, the surface noise. I was a noise artist. I love the surface noise. The mechanics of the old players, all these things were kind of fascinating. And then to be able, back then, 25,000 years ago, when I was collecting records, started to collect 78s, they were 10 cents, 25 cents each. And so easy to buy a few records, find out if you liked something.
That's not the case anymore.
No, it's not, and this is a problem with the world these days. So
Kids
it's just really fun it was just really fun to buy these things and listen to them, and look for new sounds to maybe use in the sound art, the collage, the live performances I was doing, and slowly that morphed into, oh my God, they're making records like this all over the world. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just American kind of hot jazz that we're used to hearing from this era. And then suddenly all these thoughts, like you were talking about, well, what was it like for musicians to record for the first time? What was it like for people to hear for the first time a recording? And all that started influencing the work that I made. And it still influences me and still intrigues me to find these recordings. And there's so many interesting regional recordings of music that's never really gone beyond the 78 RPM era. And the way that music had to change to fit onto a record. It's not the greatest thing, but it's very interesting how adaptable humans are and how adaptable music is. So it's just, you find your thing and
you grow with it.
You roll with it. Okay. Yeah, exactly.
Let's hear another song.
I think maybe I'll play something that is not Japanese. How's that sound?
That sounds awesome.
Korean?
Yeah, let's do it.
You want to hear a Korean record? Because Korean
always makes me hungry.
Korean music was actually one of the first things that really got me into early recorded sound. When a friend that I was working with went to Korea for work, and I said, bring me back some traditional music. I didn't really know what traditional music from Korea was like. And this was before the internet, when it was easy to figure out stuff like that. And he said, well, I bought this CD in a record store, and he handed it to me. And it turned out to all be very, very old recordings put together on a CD. And there was something about them that just went very deep with me.
Okay, let's hear it.
So,
Rob Millis, Seattle Circuit Music and Art, Sama, live in Seattle. First time in the studio, two people at the same time. That bow. Wow. Thank you for that. This is fun. It's nice to be with a person in a room, maskless. Two, I'm going to explore more of this. How do we do a DJ set like this in this kind of situation with, a listening session, shall we say? But going deeper into this. Thanks for the inspiration.
This is actually another record that's got a great runoff groove that I just lifted the needle up out of instead.
Okay.
But it doesn't matter.
You know, I never knew this. Did you know runoff groove? There could be a whole
world of sound.
World of sound. I know one. Somebody that Amy Denio was dating, Italian artist, put a whole record together of just runoff grooves. They were cute. It was charming, but it was like there was no conversation or anything like that.
Well, there isn't much time for it. It's just quick little.
But
things.
you got some that has little snippets. It's almost like Ghost. They're all
exactly.
ghosts.
It's exactly what it is. It's ghosts, and it's hearing people's voices that are 100 years old.
Yeah.
You know, and what their actual voices sound like, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, so. Without processing anything, it's deep. It goes deeper, and especially in the context of what we're trying to do with Sama, it really does create that transform. You heard that Korean music, and it transformed you.
Totally, it totally did. Yeah,
and you're here now. Okay, business. The record's out. Go buy it. Buy the vinyl. It feels good. It sounds good. It smells good. There's some great cover art in there. There's some great photos in there also. Support these artists. Learn as much about this as you can. It's really fascinating and really growing. And buy some 78s if you can. You know, get a little gramophone. Whoops. Here's the other record.
This is the Korean record that I put out of Korean tracks. It's also on Sublime Frequencies, but it's kind of long out of print. So good luck.
Okay. And you also put out that Burmese?
This is Burmese. It's also out of print, but it's Burmese 78s. So
also we'll put links, and probably there's a YouTube channel with these records because
there's download codes.
There's download codes and everything else, so we make that work. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you
for this amazing journey, and we'll be back next week with more amazing music. From all over the world and also in our little neighborhood here on Sama, Seattle Circuit Music and Art. Rob, take us out.
You're doing a great job, Derek, with juggling all of the technology.
We got this covered. We can make it work.
So what you're saying is I should play a record?
Yeah, let's play a record.
I thought, okay.
And and just look at this house. Like that this person is dedicated to their craft here completely.
I'm gonna play an Indian record. This is a great tabla solo.
Okay.
So do we have something to show over the top of it?
Play with it. That sounds so good. Oh.
By the 40s, 50s, 78s sound really, really good. It's a lot of response.
The
That's
low
a
end
whole
sounds
other good.
Word. Okay, we got to do more of this and go even deeper. How long is the record?
3 minutes.
I'll just listen to it.